Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Charlotte. But if you guys have been keeping along with our series so far, talking about each of the characters from past or recent characters, all the way to the oldest characters, we've already gone through most of these characters as well. But if you've noticed, we've actually skipped Furina. And the reason why is because I'm going to be pulling her tomorrow. And so at this point, we're going to be doing Charlotte today. Tomorrow we'll do Risley. And then the day after, we'll jump back and do Furina. And then hit Neuvillette right afterwards. And then go on through the normal rotation of the characters. That's just so that you guys can actually see the character and I can actually move pieces around for you. And since the timing is kind of close, that's what we're going to figure out and do. But going back and looking at Charlotte. Now, I actually, when she first came out, I grabbed her. She looked really cool. She looked really fun. But I didn't really think that she was going to be very useful. But in general, when you actually look at her, it makes sense why actually she's extremely useful. She's basically just a huge healer and a big cryo application dealer. So the whole point of her kit is to have constant cryo application as well as healing your teammates. So keeping this in mind, if you look at one of her best teams, in my personal opinion, it is going to be Neuvillette, Furina, Kazuha, and Charlotte. So the biggest thing here, obviously, since I don't have the Furina, I'm just using Mona instead. But basically, you're just helping out as much as possible with those stacks. If you don't have someone like Baizhu or something like that, that is supposedly the best for this team, which I personally believe is good as well, you could just use Charlotte instead. Her big maximized heals is going to be extremely useful for you if, you know, your Neuvillette is getting hit a little bit more often, maybe doesn't have that C1. So a lot of those things are going to be kind of useful for you. If you're looking at this, though, basically looking at her burst, she's going to be creating a newsflash field that'll deal AoE cryo damage. It'll restore all the HP of the nearby party members that are based on Charlotte's attack. So you'll be healing yourself once again on her attack. So having a high amount of attack is going to be extremely useful. Kind of can remind you a little bit about Chi-Chi. So keep this in mind. But there is a continuous regeneration as well in this burst. And that is going to be down here when you continuously are going to be restoring HP to the active characters when you are within the AoE of the newsflash field that is created. Keeping this in mind, her skill is a little bit different. There's two versions, which is the tap and the hold version, which we've seen a lot more skills have nowadays. Now, with the tap version, you are going to be taking a snapshot with your camera, dealing AoE cryo damage to opponents in front of her, and then applying Snappy Silhouette to a maximum of 5 opponents that are nearby. Now, at this point in time, it will deal cryo damage to affect opponents that have that effect on them at certain intervals. So it's once again that constant cryo application to those enemies who have the Snappy Silhouette on them. Now, the hold version, you can go into the viewfinder. Basically, you can open up the camera when you hold this skill, and Charlotte then enters the composition mode. During this time, the viewfinder, or basically your POV, will slowly start to expand until you reach the finisher frame state. Once you do, Charlotte can then move around freely and change direction as well. And when the hold state ends, the little guy here will deal cryo damage to all opponents locked on with the viewfinder as well, and apply the same snappy silhouette as tap mode does to them, which basically means you can still only get to a maximum of 5 members. And it also states that down here, the composition mode lasts a maximum of 15 seconds, so you can stay in that kind of like enhanced view for 15 seconds, and it allows a maximum of 5 opponents to be selected for that snappy silhouette. If you unleash this ability only after reaching the finisher frame, you will instead apply Focused Impression, which lasts longer and deals more damage, although the skill cooldown will be longer. If you look at the actual skill attributes here, you can see obviously you're basically doubling the damage, and then when you get to the different marks, this extra damage is like, okay, 39%, it increases a little bit more. Now obviously as you level this up, it will increase more and more. I only have this at level 1. If you want to bring this to level 8 just for some more extra damage, you could do so, and that could be actually useful for you, but for me, I'm just going to keep it where it is. Keeping this in mind though, just remember that you're going to go from a longer cooldown from a 12-second cooldown, which is about normal. It'll help you throughout your rotation, especially with the teams that you're going to be using. It's going to be nice. A 12 seconds is going to be nice. The 18-second from the skill on the finisher frame state could be pushing it a little bit, so it kind of just depends a little bit. You know, do you need the extra application, or is the burst going to be enough for you? Looking at passives that are going to be important to know though, with her first passive talent, this is actually going to help the skill out a lot though, because we just talked about that cooldown being long. But you can actually decrease the cooldown here if an opponent's defeated that has that focused impression on them. And so doing the hold version of the skill, while although you get a longer 18-second, cooldown, if you defeat those opponents that have it, so if they're smaller enemies or whatnot, you're basically doing this 4 times decreasing by 2 seconds each time. That's 8 seconds. That's now a 10-second cooldown for your skill, even though you did the enhanced hold version of it. Whereas the tap version of it does 12 seconds, and you don't get that because it's a snappy silhouette. So, once again, even though this is an 18-second cooldown, this can actually be turned to 10 if you kill the enemies, or at least 4 enemies that have that mark on them. And then that allows you then to go to a 10-second cooldown, which can help a lot more with your rotations. Also, when the party contains 1, 2, 3, or Fontanians other than herself, Charlotte gains a 5, 10, 15% healing bonus on her, and then when they're non-Fontanians, you basically get some extra damage. Now looking at this, you can see that obviously using the more Fontanians on her, the better, in my personal opinion. She does do some good damage, but I think using her with Neuvillette and Furina and some other characters that are going to be from Fontaine are going to be extremely useful, and she does well in those teams anyways. Looking at some weapons though, personally, there are plenty of weapons that you can use. Honestly, high base attack weapons are going to be extremely useful. Skyward Atlas has a main stat of attack percent, plus it has a high base attack, so that weapon's going to be extremely useful. There are some other weapons if you really want, using a high base attack weapon here, or here if you even want to use it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to pull off a 5-star character like, for instance, Wanderer, his personal weapon. I wouldn't really state to do that, or even Crane's Echoing Call. Once again, wouldn't really state to pull this off these characters personally, but you technically could. But I think Skyward Atlas is going to be her probably best 5-star weapon just because it is extremely good for her. Because once again, the high base attack and the attack percent main stat, and it is a 5-star weapon. Looking at the 4 stars though, her best weapon, in my personal opinion, is going to be Eye of Perception. It has a good amount of base attack, and it gives some extra damage based off her attack, while also giving her a bunch of attack in the main stat. So that's going to be extremely useful. You could use Fav Codex as well, especially if you're trying to get just more energy for the team and herself. By doing so, you do want a high amount of energy as well as attack on this character. So in the artifact section, if you go full-blown attack on your artifacts and you just have too much attack but not enough ER and kind of can't balance the two, going for a Fav Codex is going to be extremely useful for you. And then we'll talk in the artifact section about actually you switching over to a crit rate circlet so that you can actually hit the crits and actually get more particles for your team. You could also try to use Ballad of the Boundless Blue. This ability really doesn't do much for you, but it is the main stat, and it is an R5 weapon that came from an event, so most likely if you were in Fontaine and got Charlotte, you most likely also have Ballad of the Boundless Blue. So all those things considered, these weapons are going to be good for you. I would tend to stay with Eye of Perception, and most people should have the weapon in general anyways, so I would just state, as you can see here, I have too many, so you probably have a good amount of them as well. I would say to go for Eye of Perception as her best 4-star weapon option. Looking at artifacts though, as we were just talking about them, in general, you're going to want to use a combination of attack percent sets and in the ER set of the 2-piece from Emblem of Severed Fate. Now, with this 2-piece set, it's very necessary just because of the ER, and also you don't really want to do double attack because once again, the more ER, the better. Even with an ER Sans, even if I leveled this up, I'm losing about 44 something about percent ER here, which is going to put me to about 200% ER on her actual character. But that's just because each of my pieces do have ER on them, so that does help a lot with my actual stats as well to give just a bunch of ER to her. But once again, if you do have an ER weapon instead, you used either Ballad of the Boundless Blue like I talked about, or you use Fav Codex or another ER weapon, then you could actually go off of the 2-piece emblem, or you could still keep the 2-piece emblem and just switch to an attack percent Sans. Talking about this, if you are using an attack percent weapon, you're going to want to combine this with an ER Sans, an attack percent goblet, and a healing bonus circlet. If you're using Fav Codex specifically, you're going to want to use an attack percent Sans, an attack percent goblet, and a crit rate circlet. After this, if you're using any other ER weapon like Ballad of the Boundless Blue, you're going to want attack percent, and healing bonus here. Just to keep that in mind, once again, trying to get attack percent and ER as substats where you can get them. Obviously, if you have an attack percent main stat, you're going to go for ER. If you have an ER main stat, you're going to try to look for attack percent. I don't have one here, but once again, the biggest thing is really going for the main stats and then allowing this to happen. The biggest thing about this though, if you are like, well, I don't have the pieces ready for Charlotte right now, that's perfectly fine, and there's only one domain that you actually have to grind for her, and that's going to be the Emblem of Severed Fate domain. Now, we've already talked about the 2-piece energy recharge that you're going to be grabbing anyways, but the other side of that domain actually has Shimenawa's Reminiscence, and on this set, it also gives 2-piece of attack percent. So all you need to really grind is this one domain, and you can get both pieces. It'll help a lot. And then also, if you really want, you could also throw these in a strong box to grab them even more. She's actually a pretty easy character to build. Most people, if you're a later game player, will probably use this combo. As you can see, most people do, just because Glad is pretty easy to get from bosses and whatnot. And then a lot of characters in the game already use emblems, so it's already a heavily grinded set anyways, so that's why people use this as well. Going over into our actual teams though, there's a few that, could work, but there's one in particular I've already talked about that is going to be probably, in my personal opinion, her best team. If you're using Neuvillette, Furina, Kazuha, and Charlotte. Now, here, there is nothing necessarily crazy good about, this buffing Charlotte or anything. The double hydro just increases HP, which isn't actually what this healer actually focuses on. Like we talked about, she focuses on attack, and so that's what's going to be best for her. There are some other teams that you could use though, like once again, this team is just going to help the Furina stacks, as well as make sure Neuvillette doesn't die, which when Furina's going to be dropping the HP, and then he drops his own HP, but honestly, my Neuvillette has never had any issues dying. It may just be because of the high HP, but he also heals himself pretty easily, so if you use that, it shouldn't be really that bad. But I do think that that team's going to be good. If you want to switch this out and you don't have, for instance, Shenhe, and you want to switch this over to someone like Charlotte, you could do this team as well. Even though you already have Bennett as a healer, if you want to switch this over to, instead of Bennett, let's say you have Kazuha instead, and you want to take out this team, the double cryo is going to help Risley get more of that crit rate, just so that he can constantly crit a little bit more. This team's going to be nice because of constant cryo application from her to make sure that maybe Xiangling, if you're focusing a little bit more on her, maybe reactions of like trying to do a little bit more stuff on elemental mastery and whatnot. That's the only issue maybe with using Charlotte kind of with a cryo DPS, is if the cryo DPS is kind of the only one that you're trying to make do the application, she can kind of steal the show sometimes because of the constant application that she can do. But I wouldn't say that she doesn't necessarily work for that team. She does do okay and fine in the team. It just makes sure that Xiangling's going to be doing more of the reactions than Risley himself. But like I said, personally, the best team that you're probably going to be doing is some sort of freeze team. You could use Charlotte as well with someone like Ayaka's, like a cryo DPS as her kind of healer, and then using, Kazuha or Sucrose or Venti or Jean or whatever, as well as the Viridescent Swirler, and then switching them with a character like, Yelan or Xingqiu to kind of grab a kind of interesting freeze team to allow a little bit more there, as well as a good healer for that team is kind of there. So you could do that team as well. That kind of works out. I will show you what that actually looks like. If you want to do this, and let's just throw Xingqiu in there just so that it's a little bit more free-to-play friendly. You could do this if you have, for instance, Sucrose as well. I don't have my Sucrose built, but let's just say you have Sucrose built and whatever. This is a nice team that you could use as well, especially if you have Ayaka or even Ganyu, which it could help a little bit as well, just constantly cryo application here, and then the extra double crit resonance from this is going to be nice, and then making sure that you're swirling and then having the extra hydro to actually freeze. That's going to be nice for these teams. But like I stated before already, my favorite team for actually using her is going to be this team, just switching out Mona for Furina. Well, that's everything I've got for this video talking about Charlotte and actually how she works. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for the love on the videos recently. I hope you guys are liking them. I'm going to continue to be doing them as well. I am going to be doing about 5 videos a week, trying to do them during the weekdays and then taking the weekends off. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video talking about Charlotte. She's a great 4-star character, and if you have her, I would highly recommend building her as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.